Hey guys, welcome to part 7. Here's a quick review of all the radio station call letters that were handwritten on this dial. Pretty cool, eh? I think it's pretty neat. I'm going to study up on the history of these stations. Alright, let's get to work now. We are not done with the failed components yet. This is the power switch. It's just a simple on-off switch. Turn it to the right to turn it on, turn it to the left to turn it off. Made by General Electric. Of course, it's an Edison radio. It makes sense. I tried cleaning the thing with deoxit. I sprayed and sprayed into those little holes there, right there at the seam between the two halves. And it helps some, but it's still not consistent. So I don't really think this is going to be a good choice long term for this radio. It might be okay for testing, but even then it's going to be risky. I was able to fix the phono switch. The phono switch had the same problem, but I went at it with deoxit enough that now it's working consistently. Every time you hit it, it works the way it's supposed to. Only 6 of the station call letters on this dial that were handwritten on this dial are for stations that still exist today. And of those 6, 5 of them are in California and 4 of them are in LA. So this radio clearly was used in LA. The most interesting set of call letters, though, is at KMIC 1590 in Houston, Texas. And when you think about it, it's really pretty cool that back in 1929 or 1930, somebody in Los Angeles was listening to this radio to a station all the way out in Houston, Texas. That's pretty neat. It's after midnight tonight, and I'm getting tired, so I think I'll pull these off, and that's about all I'll do. I'll quit for the night. But I want to give you a look at what's inside these things, and I kind of want to get another look myself. I've been inside one of them briefly, and then I put the cover back on. It's not the kind of thing you want to damage. The way this umbilical comes out, it comes straight out the bottom of the radio, so you have to be careful when you set the radio down so you don't set it down on the cord. There's a hole, a slot cut in the cabinet. There's a slot cut in the cabinet that it drops down through. Check it out, man. Is that beautiful or what? See, look how clean that is in there. It's not shiny either. I told you these weren't real shiny. That's a beautiful condenser. But first thing I want to do is get that gang meshed so that those plates aren't just out there begging for me to bump them. Let me get a knob on the tuning shaft, eh? These are some pretty knobs. Naturally, the flat is on the bottom. When you're working on radios, guys, always try to keep the tuning condenser plates closed as much as possible. Now this thing is not working super well. There we go. I don't know why. I'll have to figure it out. It's mostly working, but it slips. Alright. See, that's a lot less, that's going to cause a lot less potential for damage. Each one of these dog houses is missing one screw. So far on the radio I'm missing 4 screws. Actually 5. 2 on the receiver chassis, on the chassis box, 2 on the dog houses, and 1 on the power unit chassis. They're just little flatted screws, little sheet metal screws. Alrighty. Very pretty indeed. Tomorrow morning, when I get back to work on this, one of the first things I'm going to do is see what I'm up against when I try to clean this. Now this is riveted on, so I am not going to try and take it off. I'm not going to try and take the tuning cord, the dial cord off, nothing. I'm going to leave it all on there. I'm going to lubricate these bearing points. I'll deoxit these little contact fingers right here. That's how you get contact from the stator. to the ground, I will use some lubricant in these bearing points. This is cool. It's got ball bearings at each end. And that'll be about it, man. I'm not going to go nuts on this thing. There's some peculiar things on this drum. We'll look at it tomorrow. So I'm going to close this video down for the night. I've been cleaning around these numbers and call letters with just a little bit of water. It doesn't appear that the water takes off the pencil, but it slowly removes some of the grime. Not all of it, but some of it. And really that's going to have to be good enough, because I do not want to remove these numbers or these call letters. These are beautiful. So you can see the difference. There's the area that I've been working on. There's what I haven't been. And it does help. This is not a shiny plastic. I tried a little polish in an area that didn't have any print on it, and it didn't shine it any. So I'm not going to worry about polishing. All I want to do is get it clean and make it so that when the lights shine through it, it looks really cool. And I also tested, because you have to be careful with ink, I tested to see if this ink was water soluble, and it was not. So it's not coming off. A lot of dirt is coming off though. They have one city written on here. It says Denver, which is kind of cool. So these numbers, or this information was probably written on here right around 1930. That's pretty cool. It might have been since then, but it wouldn't have been far since then, because radios were evolving rapidly, and it's kind of like computers. Back then you bought a radio, and within a year or two there were innovations that made your radio obsolete. For example, this radio uses a variable resistance to ground in the antenna circuit as the volume control. It wasn't too long after this radio was made that notion gave way to putting the volume control just before the audio circuit, just before the audio stage. It's kind of funny, you see that light spot right there. I'm willing to bet you that that's a place where it was on a station for a long time, and there's a lamp right behind it. Caused it to fade. There's a couple of those light spots on the dial. That is just about as good as I'll be able to get it without risking damage to it. Let me just touch this a little bit more up here. Seems to be more dirty at this area here. Maybe where it was tuned, this part faced up, who knows. So I've learned something today, that this kind of, at least on this sort of surface, you can gently wash over where things have been written with a pencil, and it doesn't take the pencil off. I'm sure if I went crazy rubbing real hard or rubbing too long, it would take it off, but it hasn't so far. It really hasn't even caused it to fade. So you can see those pretty clearly now. They look pretty good. Alright, I'm going to take a first things first, I'm going to take a wet towel and I'm going to wipe the whole radio down. There's quite a bit of dust on it. I'm going to vacuum out of places where there's a lot of dry dust in here and stuff, and just get the major dirt off of it, and then I'll get to work with with cleaning up the condensers, and then I'll polish the chassis. Before I do much else, I want to try and get this tuning to work a little bit better so that it doesn't slip so much. So I'm going to start by cleaning the little drums that the drive cord rides in. Yikes. I'm just using a little bit of lacquer thinner to get that clean. I don't know how effective this is going to be, but it's worth a try. What I was trying to do was clean this drum right here where the cord rides around the drum, those grooves, but I don't think that's the issue. I think what's happening is the spring tension. There's a spring tensioner on this. I was calling it a screw in an earlier video because I didn't get a good look at it, but now I can see it real well. There's a spring tensioner, and let me show it to you. Okay, perhaps you can see this tensioner. Let me compress it a little bit, and you can see a little bit how it works. And watch the cord. See that? Well, I don't think that's moving as freely as it should. So I'm going to clean it, and then I will compress the spring a little bit and put just a touch of lubricant, some sewing machine grease, on that little shaft. And hopefully what that'll do is loosen that, make that shaft slide easier so that it tensions correctly. Because I think that's all that's wrong. I hope I'm right. I don't want to put a lot in there because I don't want that migrating, finding its way to the cord. There, now it's working a little bit better. It's getting a little better, but not there yet. I'm going to squirt a little bit of lacquer thinner in these bearings, and I'm going to spray a little deoxit right here on this contact. I did try a little touch right there. I'm going to spray a little more. And hopefully that'll loosen this up. So the idea is to get the lacquer thinner in the bearing and start to loosen, you know, kind of dissolve that sticky grease that's in there. And hopefully that will loosen this whole thing up. Oh, look at that. Wow. Check that out, man. I never had it work that well the first time I did it. That's cool. It's still a little bit tight there. But boy, what a difference. So this will begin to break down all that sticky grease, and you keep going through it with the lacquer thinner and it washes it out. I don't know why it's having trouble right there. There's a tight spot. So Just a couple more shots of this lacquer thinner, and then I'll be able to get in there with some grease. So I'm going to do something a little bit different on this than I usually do, in that I am going to touch a little oil in those bearings before I put some grease. I'm going to put some oil with some lacquer thinner mixed with the oil into those bearings, and the lacquer thinner tends to carry that oil into places. And then the lacquer thinner dries and the oil stays behind. The reason I'm doing that is it's pretty tough to get into these bearings with grease. Boy, they are dirty though. I don't really want to use Q-tips in there because the Q-tip hairs make a mess. I don't remember Q-tips being that bad back in the day. It's like they're getting to be like paper towels, crappy quality. Wow. No wonder it was sticky. I think I need to do some more lacquer thinner rather than putting oil in there just yet. It's getting easier to turn, and I'm able to tune across the whole spectrum now. I think that was another good thing to do, was to wipe out some of the junk, because that made it possible for the lacquer thinner and the grease to kind of dissolve, kind of flow out of there. I bet this thing has not been cleaned and re-lubricated since 1929. I know that this dirt that I'm cleaning out right now is not down in the bearing, but if I can clear it away, well then the dirt that's in the bearing can flow out a little bit easier, I think. You'd think that the people that, as much as they charge for deoxit, they could come up with a can that doesn't have to be completely upright in order to spray. That can is 3/4 full, and yet I can't spray unless it is absolutely upright. What happens is, if you're not careful about it, you use up all the propellant, and then you have half can of deoxit that you can't use. Like I said, for what they charge for it, you think they could come up with a better can. Well, just like anything else, they need a competitor. Okay, let me try putting a little oil in there. I don't know if you can see these dimples here. Those dimples are created by a device on the other side of this drum. And that device is right here. You turn this, and I think it makes those dimples. You see there's a dimple right there. So the reason for these dimples right here, once you've created them with this device on the other side, is I believe this is a little copper plate here. This is a little copper ring. When you create these dimples, it creates a raised part of the copper surface that makes contact with this plunger right here. And I believe what that does is probably lights up one of these lights to tell you you're on station. So watch this plunger. See that? See it moving in and out? I think that is to tell you when you're on station. I think it's not the dimples in the copper plate that make electrical contact. They just operate this plunger and that makes electrical contact. This little switch, when it makes up, it allows the current to flow through the center, through the switch, and then back through the sleeve of this one here. Okay? So it comes up through the center, that's always connected, goes to the tip of the light bulb, goes through the light bulb. When the switch is made up, it goes through the sleeve of this light bulb holder, out through this wire, into the plunger of the switch, back out of the other part of the switch, and over to the sleeve of this light bulb, and turns this light on. Meanwhile, the tuning is getting easier. It's getting much easier, much smoother. Those bearings are getting lubricated. Now, the ones I can reach, I'm going to put a little touch of grease in there now, too. The whole time I've been working on this, these two jokers have been doing this right at my feet. And every now and then they miss each other and they take a little bite out of me. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Fred. And Buster's getting there a little personal with Fred, I think. And Fred's not too happy about it. They'll do this for hours. And then after they've fought themselves exhausted, you'll find them laying in the basket all cuddled up next to each other. They're quite a handful, but they do keep me laughing. All right, guys. I guess I better let these two get back to doing what they do, and I'll get back to doing what I do. Looking at the schematic, there is the portion of the schematic that has to do with the light-o-matic. And as I thought, it's just a switch that puts one light bulb basically in parallel with another, and one of those is switched. And that switch is that switch right there. And so let me show you what that looks like. See, there you go. That's all it is. Okay, so all I have to really do is put check for continuity across that switch. Now I have to make sure that this wire that's hanging off of it doesn't prevent that from operating. So let's see if I can do that. Yeah. But you don't see any change at all in the meter. So the switch is operating, it's moving mechanically, but it's not making electrical contact. And now I can just take this, see if I can get this cap off of here. Okay, I got to be ready for a spring. Yep, there's a spring there. Just it looks like contact points almost for like a distributor. Okay, first thing, this cap comes off. All right, and then just under that cap is this little brass spring. Okay, and then there's this plunger here, and it doesn't look like it can come out. Oh wait. Okay, now I'll go ahead and pull this plunger out. There we go. There's a contact point right there. It looks like this is just a guide. It's like a piston that rides in that cylinder. It just sits in that cylinder, and then this rides through it. Alright, so let me try to clean these. This has to ride smoothly inside that cylinder, so let me clean this off a little bit. Let's clean this up with just a little bit of sandpaper. If you're wondering, the sandpaper is 600 grit. What I did is I got a wrench on that nut right down there, and it turned real easy, and I'll explain why in a second. And I got this whole thing off of here. You may have figured out why it wasn't really stuck. It's made of plastic, and so there's no corrosion to worry about. It just threaded right out. You want to be careful with it though, because it'll break. Okay, so you see there's a shaft, like a push rod, that extends out of the barrel of this thing. That is what pushes against the dimples that are on this disc. I took all this apart and I understood all of this. I cleaned it all, even put some lubricant here and there, and did some deoxit, did everything I could. And I wasn't getting any action, no switching action. And the reason was, it seemed like this thing had to really move a big distance in order to work. Well, when I first took it apart, I noticed this right here, this little spot here, and I saw the spring, and I thought maybe it was just to keep that, you know, tight. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, there needs to be a spring on that side of this little collar, between the collar and that little cam follower face. So I was messing with it, started cleaning the shaft, and finally, I got it to break loose, and that is supposed to happen like that. That's the part I was missing. Okay, now this was really hard to get to move this smoothly. I had to clean and work on it, and this little push rod is just slightly bent, slightly, ever so slightly, so that it provides a, you know, causes a little drag in here. So it's got to be oriented a certain way. So that may wind up being a problem later. I don't know. I'm going to do the best I can to make it work as well as I can, but it may be impossible to fix it completely. All right. Now let's go ahead and slide this back together. I've already put just a tiny touch of lubricant on this little push rod right here, so it slips down into the opening. I'm going to take this little phenolic disc, set it on top of there. That's all it was. And then push this down in there. Okay. Now, next goes this assembly here. Drops down in there. Okay, just sits on top of it. And then you take this bushing. This bushing is tapered inside. The skinny, you know, the end where the wall of the bushing is thinner, that goes on it goes first down into the opening. This fat one, where the wall is fatter, faces upward. Okay. Drop that down on there. Okay, good. I took a spring I got from my Harbor Freight spring kit to replace that spring. It's pretty close. It should work. Drop that on. Bring the cap on. And thread it together. Now, this should operate as a switch. Let's see if we can get continuity when the thing operates. There we go. Hey, check that out, guys. Watch the multimeter. Okay, watch the multimeter. Oops. See that? And it doesn't have to move very far. Those dimples ought to be tall enough to make that happen. Okay, let's thread this puppy back onto the radio and see if we get lucky. Point to it. It goes right into this opening, and then these plastic threads thread into these threads here, and these are metal in here. So you want to be really gentle with it. When you tighten it, you just barely tighten it. Don't go wrenching on this. This stuff is not only plastic, but it's old plastic. It'll break. I think it's a 3/8. Let's see. 3/8. All right, just barely touch it, guys. Do not tighten this tight. Well, guys, I really wanted to make that thing work. I thought it would have been cool to see the light-o-matic operate, but it's just not going to happen. The little push rod inside of here that this terminal is part of, it's just bent, and it's bent enough so that the little plastic sleeve that's supposed to ride in keeps getting bound up, and so the thing isn't going to work reliably. And if it's not going to work right, that'll drive an owner crazy more than just a light that comes on all the time. So rather than hook that up and wait for the phone call 2 or 3 days after they get the radio that thing is acting squirrely, because what will happen is it binds up so that light will just stay on all the time anyway. But it won't. Then there will be other times where it binds up with the light off, and they'll be wondering what the heck's going on. So rather than do that, I'm just going to bypass it. I'll remount it, of course, but I'll bypass it, and I'll just run both of those lamps all the time. Okay, so here it is. Both of those lamps will light when the radio is on.
Guess what? It's that lower wire.
And I will go ahead and put the light-o-matic device down there in that threaded opening. At least it'll be historically correct, and that part will be there. It just won't be connected. It's kind of a bummer, but sometimes you gotta just take it the way it comes. These are antiques, and when things bend or get broken or things like that happen, well, sometimes you just have to accept it and live with it and do the best with what remains. Really, the only thing holding me up from finishing this receiver is this power switch. And it's a real simple switch. You just turn it one way to turn it on, turn it the opposite way to turn it off. Click, click. That's all there is to it. So hopefully that won't be too hard to find a good replacement for it. Let's take a look at the final installation of those fuses in this receiver. I've mounted both fuse holders, and I had to figure out what amperage rating for each fuse I needed to use. And so I started thinking about the tubes involved, and the currents that they use are surprising. 27 tubes have a filament current of 1.2 or 1.75 amps. So we're looking at about, well, a minimum of 7 amp fuse on that big one right there. I'll probably put a 10, I don't know, maybe that's a little too high, I don't know. 10 is probably a good round number. I've got to be able to cover surge current too. Otherwise they'll take the fuse out every time you turn the radio on. But that one there, 1.75, I'll probably put probably a 3 amp fuse in there. But I don't know. I've got to do some thinking. I don't want to go too high, and then, that kills the reason for fuses. But that's the fuses. There's the umbilical. Now I could put that inside of a sheath, but the problem is the only thing I can find are like polyester sheaths, and they look terrible. The outer jackets, they look terrible. If any of you has any suggestions on things that mimic the old cloth ones, I would love it. Otherwise, I just do this. It goes behind the radio, and actually, some people like the way this looks. It just depends on the individual. But there's the part that you would see. I've got some shrink tubing on the part that drops through the cabinet, just mostly to kind of stiffen it up a little bit so it drops straight through without any trouble. And then it'll go off to the power supply chassis. I did run new filament wires for all those 27s that are ganged together. That's the yellow. Ran a new B+, a new ground, and a new plate current wire. These capacitors, C24, 25, and 26, I was able to install on the outside of the can using the method that I described earlier with poking the leads down into the can. And this other can here, I also use those terminals. This one right here, there is no way to connect to the outside, so I just had to cut the wires and run capacitors externally. So I think this thing is going to be ready to go here shortly, and we've already done an initial power-up test of the power unit, and it did okay, so hopefully we'll get the same results with this receiver, and we'll be done with this thing soon. All right, we're going to call that a wrap for this receiver. Next time, we're going to do a power-up test for the whole thing. So, for now, in your Western Outpost in Salt Lake City, this is Michael on Thursday, July 13th, 2017. And that's all for now.